Hi everyone, welcome to this second reading video of the week. This will be a bit of a shorter one, I think. I'm just going to talk a little bit about Naoi, a couple of the principles that would be, I think, helpful to you as you approach this reading. It is another one of those review papers, like the very first one that wasn't really required reading. It was in like the introduction module, the overview module. Well, this is another one of those review articles. And so in there, you'll find a lot of other articles are being reviewed. And that's good for you for a couple of reasons. One is, you're definitely welcome to go into here and take out some of the articles, find them using Google Scholar perhaps, and use them for your own research this semester. The other thing is that it's a great agglomeration of findings, right? So you'll find a lot of well, what is it? I don't know, there must be 50 in there, probably more than 50, maybe 50, 60, 70 articles that are sort of condensed into this one. So you're getting a lot of information. The focus of it, I mean, it sounds from the title like it's going to be more technical than it really is. You can read it from a technical point of view if you want, but I'm not really asking you to do that for this, because if this was a methodology course, there's a lot of stuff in here that would help in sort of survey research and improving survey methods, survey experiment methods, and that's great. But that's not what we're doing here, right? So what we want to use it for here, and this is the other main use of it, right? Is the other main use of this is to really look at what's being said about the backlash against globalization. We're looking for evidence of causes of this backlash of globalization, and of course, there's sort of a spoiler alert in that this is in the domestic module, right? And so the conclusion that the author comes to, that Naoi comes to, is that it is domestic causes, but on the way to that, there's a lot of other things that become apparent, right? And so look for answers. Look for answers in this reading about what's the cause of people's attitudes against globalization. Those people who are backlashing against globalization, who are looking for parties who are anti-globalization. Who are those people, and why do they have those thoughts and feelings? Why do they have those attitudes? And this is really a paper that's going to give you a lot of answers to that. But there's a few things that I wanted to sort of particularly get into a little bit. One of those things that's coming up talks about embedded liberalism in here, and in the context of that, it gets into this dichotomy between sort of compensation versus trade protection. The idea of embedded liberalism and this sort of trade-off between compensation and trade protection, which we see a lot throughout this paper, but it goes back to the when trade liberalization is really getting underway in the 80s and 90s. And sort of a deal that ends up happening between people who are going to be disadvantaged by international trade. So let's take Britain, for example, right? And it's just because it's the case that I know the best, right? So let's take Britain. Britain has coal miners back in the 1980s. It still has a few, but it has a lot back in the 70s and 80s. And through trade liberalization, now we're going to import more coal from abroad. I think from Chile, from Australia, from the Southern Hemisphere, like lots of coal from abroad, far away. And they say, look, this is the rationale of trade. Look, it's cheaper to produce it over there and to ship it in, right, and then to buy it from those guys than it is to mine it in Britain. So that's what they're off to go and do. And they say, and here's the deal that the government does. The government says, look, acting on behalf of maybe society, right? So here's the deal that society does. They say, okay, listen, we realize as we liberalize trade, as we open up our borders to more and more coal imports, that there's going to be a lot of people in the United Kingdom that are going to lose their jobs. Coal miners, right, are going to lose their job. But what we'll do is we'll compensate those people. So we'll have a good level of benefits, right? Unemployment benefits. We'll have retraining schemes. We'll have other ways to use the extra money that we get from having cheaper coal to give some benefit to those people who've lost their livelihoods. And that doesn't just happen in the coal industry, right? That the idea of that deal, right? That embedded liberalism, that trade liberalization, the compensation side of things, right? So we're going to have free trade, but we're going to compensate the losers through generous benefits and retraining and other schemes, other programs. And so that was basically the deal in most Western countries, or maybe even in most countries, until fairly recently. And there was public support behind that. They said, okay, we get it. We're not going to have any trade protection, so we're not going to protect our own homegrown industries, but we're going to compensate those industries that lose out. And so you'll see that come up in the reading. Because one of the things that I think we're finding, right, is that the balance is sort of shifting away from now liberal trade and compensation, and we'll see this later on in the semester as well, to more trade protection, right? And without the compensation, we have well, that's one of the things that's happened, right? Is that the welfare state, the benefits are becoming less and less and less generous, and so people are saying, well, that was the deal, right? We let you have trade liberalization if you compensate us when we lose our jobs through international trade. And now the compensation is getting less and less and less and less and less. And so we're saying, well, let's have more protection then, because that's the other side. Let's have more trade protection if we're going to have lower compensation. So you'll see that in connection with that, what you'll see is it'll talk about studies where they're trying to figure out, is it the coal miner, right? Is it the individual who's lost out? Is it his or her own economic interest, and the sort of threat to their own economic interest that leads them to a backlash against globalization? Or is it their perceptions of other people's economic interests? Another thing to say is it economic interest at all? Or is it non-material factors, right? And here, in the context of a backlash against globalization, non-material factors usually mean some sort of cultural threat, right? Is it a threat to our culture that we're worried about, or is it a threat to our economic advantages? So this is sort of the material versus the non-material argument that you'll see in the reading quite a bit as well. So watch for that, material versus non-material. And material just means economic, and non-material means things like ideas like culture, right? So you'll see in there some of the surveys that they use. They'll say, should children in the United States sing the national anthem in Spanish, right? And so that's the idea, to try and get it away from economic factors, because other experiments will say, should we let in migrants, economic migrants who have this profile, right? So they have this amount of education, they work in these industries. Should they come in? Should the government allow them in, right? And the idea with that is to try and get at these material factors. Hey, they're going to take our jobs. That's sort of a factor. But then, the other thing is, well, what if it's not about our jobs? What if it's about, sort of the non-material culture, identity types of questions? And so that this paper gets into that as well. So it deals with a lot of these possible reasons for this backlash against globalization. But remember, later on in the course, we'll look at states, right, and nation states coming out of international organizations. We'll look at trade. But right now, we're looking more at individuals, right, and their attitudes and their decisions to vote for one party over another party, right, on the basis of whether that party is more pro or more anti-globalization. What causes them to do that, right? So you'll see material versus non-material factors. You'll see sort of this idea of on the material side of things, you'll see, well, is it their own individual economic benefit, or is it the benefit of other people? And then which other people, right? People, does it matter if these other people's livelihood that's under threat? Does it matter where they live or why their livelihood's under threat? And you'll see that those things do matter, right? So read that. It's very interesting. It's quite long. It's quite detailed. But it's condensing basically all of the research that's been done on these sort of, why do individuals favor globalization? Why do they fight against globalization? It's going to get into a lot about survey creation. And like I said, that's great, but it's not, don't worry if you sort of, read through it and have it going in your mind, and it's not a bad thing to know, but don't focus on that at all. Focus much more on the reasons for the backlash, the explanations of people's attitudes towards globalization. And just to sort of remind you of that particular compensation versus trade protection. I actually want to do one more now that I've said that, because this is at the beginning, because it says survey experiments. So they have two sorts of experiments: survey experiments and observational studies. So just to sort of give you, as you're going into it, so you can, again, this is more methodological and maybe it's not as important, but it might be something you want to know at the very beginning of the paper. And I think there's a question on the test about it as well. Right? But observational studies are studies like in our first reading this week, where we're taking data. And we are analyzing that data. And that might be survey data and that sort of thing. Now that I say that, of course, we're doing that with survey data, but with survey experiments, what we're doing is we're not observing people out there in the world. What we're doing is we are bringing people into the lab, perhaps, even if it's a virtual lab. We're bringing people in, we're giving them a treatment, right? We're giving one group a treatment, another group, we're giving a different treatment, and maybe a third group, we're giving like a placebo treatment. And the treatment is, and this is a word that they use a lot in the articles, so treatment is like it's like a paragraph or two or something, and they'll give you some sort of details about either a group of people who have lost their jobs due to globalization, or they'll give you talk about policies that the government could implement, right? And so they'll vary the treatment, they'll randomize the participants into different treatment groups, they'll give the treatment, and then they'll take a post-test, right? They'll ask them a question, and then from that response, what they'll do, the response that the people give them, they'll then analyze the data. Then they'll say, okay, the people that got this treatment behaved in this way. The people that got that other treatment behaved in this way, and they'll also look at the background, right, of the people who are reacting in certain ways. And so they'll find, most of this paper is about experimental sort of survey experiments, but at the beginning, it talks a little bit about observational, which is more like, so the survey experiment is more like a real experiment where you really, have different groups, and you select the people, or you randomly put them into the different groups, and you test them after they've been exposed to some sort of treatment, right? And the treatment is usually in these ones, like a paragraph or something. Observational is more, it's more what we might say a natural experiment. It's people who are already behaving in a certain way. In that first paper, for example, house prices are already going up. Right? We didn't do like a lab situation where we increase some people's house prices and see if they now vote for Conservative. Right? That doesn't really make well, no, it doesn't. It would make sense, but that's not what happened, right? They just looked at people who were already out there in houses that were already out there, and voters who were already voting, and just got some data about those people and measured that. So that's the difference. This is going to focus, but that's much more methodological than we really need to be in this class. I read this to really find out the results of the research that they're doing, rather than like how they did their research. Okay.